Can you describe what depression does to you? What words would you put to it?
It's so terribly frightening. If someone came to the door and said, you've won 23 million on the national lottery, or they said, your family have been wiped out in an aircraft disaster, nothing. You are void of feeling and emotion, and that is the most horrible thing.
So there are all sorts of these great made-for-TV movie diseases out there. But when you want to come to, say, basic meat and potatoes of human medical misery, there is nothing out there like depression. Depression is absolutely crippling. Depression is incredibly pervasive and thus important to talk about. I'll make the argument here today, a number of things, but one critical thing being that basically depression is like the worst disease you can get.
And here's the problem. Depression has two radically different meanings depending on the context. So in everyday conversation, when people say they're depressed, they use the word depression as a synonym for sadness.
Right off the bat, we've got a semantic problem, which is we all use the word depression in an everyday sense. You get some bad news about something, you know, to replace the transmission in your car, somebody disappoints you enormously, and you feel bummed, you feel depressed, you were down for a few days.
In that sense, all of us know the pain of depression. And yet, in a clinical context, depression is shorthand for a devastating illness. Did I get it? There it is. Okay. For a devastating illness, we refer to it technically as major depressive disorder. This is an illness which robs people of their restorative sleep, robs them of their energy, robs them of their focus, their concentration, their memory, their sex drive, their ability to experience the pleasures of life.
And when you think about it, that is a very sad thing. You look at some of our major diseases, somebody with cancer, somebody crippled by heart disease, and you see the most unlikely things out there. You see somebody saying, well, obviously I'm not glad I'm dying of cancer, but without this disease, I never would have realized the importance of friends. I never would have reconciled with my family members. I never would have found my God on a completely weird level. I'm almost glad this has happened to me. Humans have this astonishing capacity to derive pleasure out of the most unlikely domains. What could possibly be worse than a disease whose defining symptom is the inability to feel pleasure?
We now know depression lights up the pain circuitry of the brain to such an extent that most clinically depressed individuals, if you talk to them and they let their guard down, they will tell you, as they've told me hundreds of times, it's torment, it's agony, it's torture. And many begin to look to death as a welcome means of escape. Depression is the main driver behind suicide, which now claims over 1 million lives every year worldwide. Now, I know what you're probably thinking at this point. Man, this talk is going to be really, depressing. So I'm going to give you a friendly little spoiler alert. It's not. It's truly not. Depression, yes, it is a treacherous foe, but what I've found in my 20 years of clinical research and clinical work is this is a foe that can be defeated. That's the good news, and that's the news that I'm going to focus on. First, a little more bad news. Depression is now a global epidemic. Now, I want you to look at these lines. We've got 4 different generations on this graph. The green line on the right, that's the oldest Americans. And by the time they've made it out into their 60s and 70s, they have a lifetime rate of depression of 10%. That's horrible, but it's much lower than every succeeding generation. Now take a look at the line that really upsets me the most is the one on the far left. That's our youngest American adults. Do you see what's happened? By the time they're in their mid-20s, they already have a rate of depression of 25%. And remember, we're talking about a potentially lethal, debilitating illness. Left unchecked, it's an illness that can cause brain damage. And if we extrapolate that line, by the time they reach middle age, their lifetime rate of depression will already be over 50%. So what in the world is going on? Consider the experience of the Kaluli people, of the highlands of Papua New Guinea. They've been studied extensively by the anthropologist Edward Schieffelin. He spent over a decade among the Kaluli. One of his research questions was, how often do the Kaluli experience the same kind of mental illness that we do? And he certainly found some forms of it. He interviewed over 2,000 members of the Kaluli and extensively queried them for their experience of clinical depression. And you know what he found? 1 marginal case out of 2,000. That gives them a rate of clinical depression that's probably about 100 times lower than ours. I'll tell you why I find that really remarkable. Because among other things, the Kaluli lead really, really hard lives. Really. They have high rates of infant mortality. They have high rates of parasitic infection. They have high rates of violent death. But they don't become clinically depressed. They grieve, absolutely. They don't get shut down. What's protecting them? Lifestyle. But what happened 200 years ago with the Industrial Revolution? It's been termed radical environmental mutation. I like that term. It's as if modern American and Western life is radically discontinuous from everything that came before. I'm going to put it for you as pithily as I can. We were never designed for this. We were never designed for the sedentary, indoor, socially isolated, sleep-deprived, fast food-laden, frenzied pace of modern life. The result? An epidemic of depressive illness.
We're fundamentally a social species. And social species, by definition, create emergent organizations, superorganismal structures. That means dyads, pairs, families, villages, institutions, cultures.
Did you know that FaceTime, time in the physical presence of our loved ones, actually puts the brakes on our stress response? Did you know that our ancestors spent all day, every day in the company of their loved ones, their friends? Think about the extensive FaceTime they shared with the people that matter most. And what have we done? We've traded FaceTime for screen time. And the result is devastating. The result is devastating. We're born to connect. We need that connection in our treatment protocol. We work very, very hard to help each depressed individual resist the urge to withdraw, because when you're ill, your body tells you to shut down and pull away. When you're physically ill with the flu, that's adaptive. When you have clinical depression, It's the worst thing in the world you can do, even though every fiber of your being is telling you exactly the opposite.
So I've spent a good deal of time over the last couple of decades studying social isolation and perceived isolation. Perceived isolation has another name that people use, and it's loneliness. And so we've spent a lot of time looking at loneliness and how that impacts the brain and how that impacts biology. And we have found that it affects, for instance, not only what the brain is doing and how the brain perceives the rest of the environment, but it also affects how you sleep, because the brain remains on alert when you feel isolated, and it affects which genes are turned on and off. So it has a very broad and powerful effect, much broader than was appreciated when we first started studying this. There are some predictors of whether you feel isolated, whether you're married. On average, people who are married feel less lonely. Frequency of contact with friends and family, the greater that frequency, on average, the less lonely you feel. And your collective identity, whether you have an important social identity. But some people in marriages feel estranged from their spouse, and that is a particularly isolating feeling when you have that experience. When you have contact with family, but that contact is negative, it can be particularly isolating. These holidays that people enjoy, Thanksgiving is a case in point, you're supposed to enjoy that safe social surround with friends and family. When you're there but you don't have that feeling of connection, it's particularly isolating. So you see the objective isolation and the subjective can vary quite dramatically, and when it does, it's particularly painful. So we experimentally manipulated whether people felt lonely or not. And in fact, we did this in the same individuals, right? So we made a group feel lonely, and then we made them feel very connected, or vice versa, so that order wasn't an important factor. And what we found was really stunning. If I make you feel lonely, you become more depressed. You become shyer. Your social skills are poor, and we now have brain imaging work is to say why you actually develop poor social skills when you feel lonely. You feel more hostile. You're angrier toward others. Your mood goes down. You fear negative evaluation. So all these things that we worried about being confounding factors turned out to be consequences. In the 1980s, scholars estimated that about 20% of Americans felt lonely at any given point in time. 2 recent nationally representative surveys indicate that this number has doubled. But you don't hear people talking about feeling lonely. And that's because loneliness is stigmatized. The psychological equivalent of being a loser in life or a weak person. And this is truly unfortunate, because it means we're more likely to deny feeling lonely, which makes no more sense than denying we feel hunger, thirst, or pain. For living with loneliness, we now know, is a major risk factor for broad-based morbidity and mortality.
What is worry? Worry is a thought process. It's a collection of thoughts which occur together in relation to future negative events. So the key is, worry is a thought process. It's something you do in your head. You're thinking about something. And it's not just typically a single thought, it's multiple thoughts. Either the same thought looping over and over and over again, or a chaining or a spiraling of thoughts. And it's usually always related to future negative events. Rarely do people worry about good things happening to them. And rarely do people worry about the past. Now, sometimes people will tell me, oh no, I worry about stuff from the past. But usually what they mean is they worry about how the things in the past are going to affect them in the future.
So the course of time is really very much like the course of a ship in the ocean. Because here's the ship, you see, and it leaves behind it a wake. And the wake fades out, and that tells us where the ship has been, in just the same way as the past and our memory of the past tells us what we have done. Now, the important thing to remember in this illustration is that the wake doesn't drive the ship any more than the tail wags the dog. If I define myself as the whole field of events we'll say the organism-environment field, which is the real me, then all the things that happen to me may be called my doing. And that is the real sense of karma. But when we speak about freedom from karma, freedom from being the puppet of the past, that simply involves a change in your thinking. It involves, in other words, you're getting rid of the habit of thought whereby you define yourself as the result of what has gone before, and instead get into the more plausible and more reasonable habit of thought, in terms of which you don't define yourself in terms of what you've done before, but in terms of what you're doing now. And that is liberation from the ridiculous situation of being a dog wagged by its tail.
Additionally, what can happen for people who worry excessively is they can get really good at worrying. They can be highly efficient worriers to the point that they may not even recognize that they're worrying. I often get this experience where people will come and they'll see me and they'll say, I'm not worrying about anything. I just have this free-floating anxiety. That's a really common term I'll hear. Well, you get into it a bit and you recognize actually it's not just there out of the blue. There's a lot of worrying that's going on. You're just not aware that you're doing it.
Suchness comes and goes like everything else because this whole world is an on and off system. As the Chinese say, it's the yang and the yin. And therefore it consists of now you see it, now you don't, here you are, here you aren't, here you aren't. Because that's the very nature of energy, to be like waves, and waves have crests and troughs. Only we, being under a certain kind of sleepiness or illusion, imagine that the trough is going to overcome the wave or the crest. The yin, the dark principle, is going to overcome the yang or the light principle, and that off is finally going to triumph over on. And we, shall I say, bug ourselves by indulging in that illusion. Gee, supposing darkness did win out, wouldn't that be terrible? And so we're constantly trembling and thinking that it may, because after all, isn't it odd that anything exists? It's most peculiar. It requires effort, it requires energy, and it would be so much easier for there to have been nothing at all. Therefore we think, well, since the is side of things is so much effort, you always give up after a while and you sink back into death. But death is just the other face of energy, and it's the rest, the not being anything around, that produces something around, just in the same way that you can't have solid without space, or space without solid. And so when you find that out, you become full of energy and delight. And you suddenly see through the whole sham of things. You realize you're that. We won't put a name on it. You're that. And you can't be anything else. So you are relieved of fundamental terror. That doesn't mean that you're always going to be a great hero, that you won't jump when you hear it bang, that you won't worry occasionally, that you won't lose your temper. It means, though, that fundamentally, deep, deep down within you, you will be able to be human in the pains, difficulties, and struggles that naturally go with human existence.
What if most of what you've been told in the media about psychedelics is wrong? More than 40 years ago, governments worldwide made psychedelics illegal, calling them dangerous drugs. But the most dangerous drugs on Earth are alcohol and nicotine, and both are legal. The law is not based on science. For thousands of years, native cultures have used psychedelics not as drugs, but as medicines. And science is on their side. Numerous studies show that psychedelics are not neurotoxic. They're non-addictive, and they have the power to cure even the most stubborn cases of anxiety, depression, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder. When people with treatment-resistant PTSD were given the psychedelic MDMA combined with psychotherapy, 83% were cured. Compare that to just 25% with psychotherapy alone. The caffeine in your coffee is more toxic on your body than psilocybin mushrooms. The science shows these non-addictive substances actually slow down activity in areas of the brain overactive in people with depression. In one study by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, 80% of subjects who were given psilocybin said the experience increased their sense of well-being and life satisfaction, and 30% called it the single most important experience of their lives. Psilocybin has cured anxiety, depression, cluster headaches, and smoking addictions. One study from the University of Southern Florida found psilocybin may even lead to neurogenesis, or the regrowth of brain cells. The science shows long-term drinkers of the Amazonian psychedelic brew ayahuasca have increased levels of serotonin. That's the brain chemical that regulates happiness, and ritual ayahuasca drinkers are less likely to have addictions. Western medicine tends to just treat symptoms, ignoring the root cause of many illnesses: trauma. We've all had trauma, and when we don't process it and purge it from our minds, trauma manifests itself in our bodies as unexplained pain, sickness, depression, anxiety, PTSD, cancer. The list goes on and on. When taken with the right mindset in a safe setting, psychedelics can heal trauma. When people consume these medicines, they enter a dreamlike state where a lifetime of traumatic memories are unlocked and processed, detaching the fear and emotion from the memories and creating new neural pathways. One of the greatest human rights tragedies of this century is that the general population does not have access to these medicines. Journalist Graham Hancock noted, quote, "At the deepest level, our consciousness is what we are. To the extent that if we are not sovereign over our own consciousness, then we cannot, in any meaningful sense, be sovereign over anything else either." Psychedelics are empowering. They put the power back into your hands and show you you can heal yourself from within.
The caveat really is that I have an increasingly healthy respect for what can go wrong on psychedelics, and wrong in a way that I think has lasting consequences for people. And so, there's a lot that can go right with psychedelics, and to some degree, I think they're still indispensable for a lot of people. They certainly seem to be indispensable for me. I don't think I ever would have discovered meditation without having taken, in particular, MDMA, but MDMA and mushrooms and LSD all played a role for me in unveiling an inner landscape that was worth exploring. The unique power and liability is that they are guaranteed to work in some way. And this is a point that Terence McKenna always made.
Right.
Terence McKenna was a huge booster of psychedelics and a very articulate one, and he poo-pooed any other spiritual methodology, meditation and chanting and yoga, anything else that people brought to him, saying, well, can't you kind of get the same benefit without drugs? And his point was, well, you teach someone to meditate, you teach them yoga, there's no guarantee whatsoever that something's going to happen. They could spend a week doing it, they could spend a year doing it, who knows what's going to happen, they may just get bored, and they're going to wander away from this thing not knowing that there was a there. If I give you, 5 grams of mushrooms or 300 micrograms of LSD and tell you to sit on that couch for an hour, you are guaranteed to have a radical transformation in your experience. It doesn't matter who you are, this freight train of significance is going to come bearing down on you, and we just have to watch the clock and know it's going to happen. And that's a fact. But so that's the advantage, because you're guaranteed to realize at the end of that episode that it is possible to have a radically different experience than you tend to have. And if you have a good experience, you're going to realize that human life can be just unutterably sublime, that it's possible to feel at home in the universe in a way that you couldn't have previously imagined. But if you have a bad experience, and the bad experiences are every bit as bad as the good experiences are good, you will have just this harrowing encounter with madness, and it's as pathological as any lunatic who's wandering the streets, raving to himself and completely cut off from others. You can have that experience, and hopefully it goes away, and in virtually every case it does go away. But it's still rough, and it still has consequences for people. Some of the consequences are good. I happen to think that it gives you a basis for compassion, in particular for people who are suffering mental illness that you couldn't otherwise have. But it's not an experience that I'm eager to have again.
And so obviously I don't really advocate for psychedelics. I don't think anybody needs to do them or has to do them. For me, they were the only way I could have cracked open, my own spirit in a way.
Do the book title.
However, I do think that if you were to be scrupulous and research into it, you would find that certain types of natural psychedelics have, if anything, anti-addictive properties, and all of the evidence really points towards that. But you have the people who are running these drug rehab situations. They've demonized all the drugs, and maybe it's even a part of that archonic deception that Graham was talking about. But I also, as I told you before, I think a lot of people who were addicts are actually people who had that strong innate need to experience non-ordinary states of consciousness. Yeah. But because our society has turned it into just, this destructive, culture.
And so I haven't, my healthy respect for the power of psychedelics has led me to not take many for many years. And it's been years since I've taken anything, and my use tapered off in my 20s when I got into meditation and was spending more time on retreat and beginning to feel that I was getting kind of hitting the center of the bullseye with meditation in a way that I was certainly not guaranteed to with psychedelics, that I basically stopped using everything and just practiced meditation. But there's no question that I wouldn't have become sufficiently interested in meditation but for the experiences I had.
We live in an incredibly busy world. The pace of life is often frantic, our minds are always busy, and we're always doing something. So with that in mind, I'd like you just to take a moment to think, when did you last take any time to do nothing?
So now, can you allow your mind to be quiet? Isn't it difficult? Because the mind seems to be like a monkey, jumping up and down and jabbering all the time. Once you've learned to think, you can't stop. And an enormous number of people devote their lives to keeping their minds busy and feel extremely uncomfortable with silence. When you're alone, nobody's saying anything, there's nothing to do. There's this worry, this lack of distraction. I'm left alone with myself. So, well, why do you want to run away from yourself? What's so bad about it? Why do you want to forget this? Why do you want to become yourself? Because you are addicted to thoughts. This is a drug, a real dangerous one. Compulsive thinking, going on and on and on and on and on all the time.
Just 10 minutes, undisturbed. And when I say nothing, I do mean nothing. So that's no emailing, texting, no internet, no TV, no chatting, no eating, no reading. Not even sitting there reminiscing about the past or planning for the future. Simply doing nothing. I see a lot of very blank faces. My thinking is probably have to go a long way back. And this is an extraordinary thing, right? We're talking about our mind. The mind, our most valuable and precious resource through which we experience every single moment of our life. the mind that we rely upon to be happy, content, emotionally stable as individuals, and at the same time to be kind and thoughtful and considerate in our relationships with others. This is the same mind that we depend upon to be focused, creative, spontaneous, and to perform at our very best in everything that we do. And yet, we don't take any time out to look after it. In fact, we spend more time looking after our cars, our clothes, and our hair than we... Okay, maybe not our hair, but you see where I'm going. The result, of course, is that we get stressed. Meditation offers the opportunity, the potential to step back and to get a different perspective, to see that things aren't always as they appear. You know, we can't change every little thing that happens to us in life, but we can change the way that we experience it. That's the potential of meditation, of mindfulness. You don't have to burn any incense, and you definitely don't have to sit on the floor. All you need to do is to take 10 minutes out a day to step back, to familiarize yourself with the present moment so that you get to experience a greater sense of focus, calm, and clarity in your life.
Like, I can remember one of the first times I ever did DMT, the day afterwards, like I had this completely different view of the world that I had to sort of apply now, all these other, and like figure out, like, do all these factors that I've considered as being important, how many of them am I going to throw out? Like, the way I described it is like my computer rebooted and now only has one folder on the desktop. And that folder is labeled my old bullshit. And so now I have to open this folder and go, okay, how much of this is valid?
Right.
Like, Jesus, this is my whole thought process. This is my whole mind. This is how I interface with reality. Unfortunately, some of it made its way back in, you know, and then, you know, I had to do another trip, you know, a few months later, and then I threw out more of it. And it was a sort of a deliberate process of reevaluation.
You can't reject it all. There's some good stuff in that folder.
Right.
But I think what the DMT experience, the psychedelic experience does, you know, that's partly what it does. I like your analogy of the folder, because now you're looking at the folder from the desktop. You're outside the folder.
Yes.
You know, so it's liberated you. You were imprisoned in the folder before. Now you can look at it from the outside, and you can go through and say, oh, you know, delete, delete, delete. Oh, this is good. Let's keep this.
Yeah.
You know, let's integrate it. So, you know, ultimately this is a process of, you know, personal cleansing, both physically and emotionally you know, psychologically in your encounters with these things, but also cultural cleansing. You know, I mean, there are good memes out there, and there are good things going on, but there's so much noise, there's so much bullshit. It's hard to sort out what's worth preserving and what needs to be dispensed with.
Now, what do psychedelics do, and why are they such social dynamite? The answer is, it's not a health issue. It's not an addiction issue. It's not, I mean, that's preposterous. It's about boundary dissolution. Every society, from the classic Maya to Fujiwara, Japan, to the France of the Bourbons, every society establishes a set of boundaries, which it then calls reality, and woe betide you if you go across the boundary, because then you are outcast, outclassed, outlandish, and the full fury of the community can be turned against you.
The great evil, in my humble opinion, which haunts our enterprise, and I say this realizing I'm setting the fox among the chickens, the great evil that has been allowed to flourish in the absence of mathematical understanding is relativism. And what is relativism? It's the idea that there is no distinction between shit and shinola. That all ideas are somehow operating on equal footing. So one person is a chaos theorist, Another is a follower of the revelations of this or that New Age guru. Someone else is channeling information from the Pleiades. And we have been taught that political correctness demands that we treat all these things with equal weight. If we had learned mathematical logic or reason or rules of evidence, when someone approaches us excited to inform us that the ruins of Lemuria have been spotted in the deep sea off Big Sur or something like that, we would be able to respond to that with the contempt it deserves. I had a conversation about this recently with someone who, if I had to describe their job category, I would describe them as mafiosa. And I said, what do you think of the abduction phenomenon? And without hesitation, this person said, there are just so many foolish people in the world. And to me, all of these things are intelligence tests. And the people who pass the intelligence test are not worrying about pro bono proctologists from other star systems showing up unannounced in their bedrooms. So, we have perfected politeness. We have perfected the ability to listen to damn foolishness without betraying by so much as the flick of an eyebrow that we realize what we're in the presence of. Now I think it's time to refine our mathematical skills, learn to think straight, and not be afraid to denounce the pernicious forms of foolishness which are vitiating the energies of our community and making us appear marginal and absurd in the discourse about truly transforming society.
Well, I can't wait to see this laboratory of clarity unfold before me tonight, as Homer and as all nonsense is dispelled. The scalpel of reason is brought out by Terence.
Yes, well, it is an ambiguous enterprise and fraught with contradiction, but forward, ever forward.
When you look out onto the world, it certainly appears the earth is flat. The ground beneath you is stable and unmoving, and the stars and suns circle the earth. Hundreds of years ago, elaborate theories were developed based on these common sense observations to explain and predict the reach of the oceans and the movement of celestial bodies. When science demonstrated that these common sense observations were illusions and depicted the earth and the universe in a completely different way, people slowly came to accept that the world was not as it seemed. Scientific measurements and sophisticated calculations have repeatedly demonstrated that what we think is intuitive, obvious, and common sense cannot be trusted to be true.
Society would look very different if rationality, rational thinking, and decision-making were widespread. Just to name a few of many, many things that I could name, we as a society would demand evidence from politicians for the claims that they made. We would notice when politicians were misdirecting us by playing on our emotions. We would be less vulnerable to prejudice and to stereotypes because we would be wary of the confirmation bias, which is a very universal bias in which you look for examples that fit a stereotype, but you don't look for examples that don't fit the stereotype. So you end up confirming and reinforcing a stereotype in your minds. We would spend our money much more effectively as a society to stave off important risks.
More starvation, more agony, more wars, more destroyed land, more toxic output. It's interesting. I'll bet, though, that there are sectors in Japanese society that carry a small smile around on their face because they know then that while the rest of the world sinks into food riots, epidemics, and propaganda, that they will probably be able to ride it through. The genius of the Japanese is that they have been living in an environment requiring careful resource management for centuries. They're masters of two things: resource management and long-term planning. We don't understand either. Our attitude is chop it down, move on.
Published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that walking outside in a natural area for 90 minutes is better for you than walking outside in an urban area. Well, yeah, walking anywhere for 90 minutes is good for you. The researchers found specific changes in the brain when people went on more natural walks. They found decreased activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex. This area is known to become particularly active during rumination or when negative thoughts keep playing on loop in your head. So spending time in nature might help us be better at emotional regulation and could lift the mood in those who suffer from stress, anxiety, or depression.
I'm starting to reread a bunch of Gandhi, and it was kind of traumatic because he's so clearly, unbelievably amazing, and the stuff that he is suggesting is so, profoundly opposite from what is happening in our world today.
Really?
Sure. I mean, he says that the like the purpose of civilization, in a way, should be to make life simpler.
Yeah. Like, they're meant to be our trusted servants, like police and government officials. That ain't the feeling I get when I'm walking around. Like, I sort of feel like that you should be able, with police cars, you should be able to ask them to give you a lift home if you want. Whenever that's happened to me, it's had negative consequences.
He also thinks that, voluntary renunciation is kind of the key to happiness.
Oh my God. What? Like renunciation of sex and drugs and everything?
Well, for him, pretty much everything, but, I think we could maybe keep it to wealth and keep the other stuff.
That's bloody convenient. Yeah, well, this is the thing, is that this is what I feel, sort of as, and I suppose it doesn't take an incredible amount of analysis to reveal that our primary desires are incessantly stimulated to keep us basic consumers. Our basic fundamental desires are overly stimulated. The problems that we had, like recently in London, I think, a friend of mine said, you have a generation of people that have been accidentally marketed to. Because marketing is all pervasive. They're getting marketed products that they can't afford, can't ever hope to acquire. They believe the only way that they're going to achieve happiness is with the acquisition of these products that they can't afford. They see them out there. They see people living that lifestyle. They have that lifestyle beamed incessantly into their minds through media, which I participate in, and it's creating this. That was fascinating for me, Daniel, about the recent riots in London, is that it was the nihilism. That it was about nothing. This was not Paris, this is not Prague 1968, this is not people sort of rising up against the tyranny that they should be rejecting, but just sort of like, oh, fucking hell, give me an Xbox. Yeah. Just like a sort of like a knee-jerk, antipathetic, because there's no hope, there's no, and like what you're talking about when you're saying change the paradigm, how do we go about that? How do we sort of say, right, well, we've got these institutions of media, we've got these financial institutions, we have the means of distribution, we have the means of production, we have all these Marxist maxims in place, we have the fundamentals and structure. How do we alter the consciousness, the fundamental unifying field? How do we influence change on that level to alter the world?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thanks.
Capitalism is as anti-human a philosophy as you can possibly conceive, because at this very moment we should be consuming less, manufacturing less, selling less, transporting less. And what's the battle cry? Free trade everywhere. What does free trade mean? It means my right to come to your country and sell the most outlandish junk you've ever seen, and you will have no right to turn it away, because in the name of free trade, crapola has to go everywhere. The real life and death struggle is between capitalism and democracy. Democracy says everybody has an innate worth that must be honored. Capitalism says those who die with the most toys win. You cannot reconcile these two things.
Across our history as a species, we have survived and prospered by banding together. couples, families, and tribes for mutual protection and assistance. We think of loneliness as a sad condition, but for social species, being on the social perimeter is not only sad, it is dangerous. Not long ago, we thought about the genes as the keyboard on which life's song played out. What this research suggests is that if the genes are the keys on the piano, then the environment, including your social environment, is the pianist, influencing which keys are turned on and off.
How do we, reinvent community? How do we create communities that are, relatively self-sufficient and resilient, and kind of undo all of the stuff that, the last centuries, the effort of capitalism has been to take all of the things that were human relations and turn them into monetary exchanges. So people used to make their own clothes, now they buy clothes. People used to take care of their own kids, now they pay other people to do it. And that was because, capitalism requires more and more things being turned into money, being turned into profit. But that's kind of now reached its absurd limit where there's nothing left to turn into money. So at that point, the capitalist system is breaking down. And I think what we're going to ultimately recognize is that capitalism was a transitional and immature system, but it's got the planet to be globalized, and now something else has to emerge.
The thing that was so great about the 60s and that is so frustrating about the 90s is people do not get pissed off. I mean, I can tell you this and you can nod in agreement, but, at some point the thing becomes so odious, so clearly intellectually bankrupt, so clearly toxic to any kind of human values that any of us can relate to, that you just have to put yourself on the line. There is no way out unless people who really understand the gravity of the situation and the stakes make their voices heard. If we leave it up to the institutions that have been put in place over the last 500 years, these are anti-human institutions. These institutions hate the human race, hate ordinary people. And until we wake up to this, we're going to be their victims. We're the marks. Well, how do you like being a mark? You can just take so much of that, and then you just finally have to stand up and say enough,
Collective connectedness can be promoted by becoming a part of something bigger than yourselves. If the obstacles to connection seem insurmountable, consider volunteering for something that you enjoy. Perhaps helping to serve the needy, volunteering in a museum, a zoo, a running club, or a TEDx event. Or simply taking time to speak to elders at a retirement home.
See, I want you to start seeing yourself as a creator, and not necessarily as a creative person or an artistic person, but a creator. That means that you're someone who has a vision for what you want to manifest in the world. And that can happen in any kind of way. That can either be literally through painting and art and music, or it can be by designing great games, or it can be by being an engineer that creates amazing products or amazing processes, or it can be by being a product designer. It can be starting a charity. It can be helping people with your understanding and your wisdom and your expertise and figuring out how to translate that knowledge to them so that it helps their lives. It can be about raising a great family. It can be about having amazing relationships and contributing everything that you can to that relationship. It can be about helping your friends. Whatever it is, it's still you creating. Creating means that you have an idea in your mind, some sort of vision, and it's compelling enough for you that you're willing to sacrifice for it. And it's something that's going to make a positive change in the world. It's something that's new. Because the other thing that I found through my journey is that external rewards are really not as fulfilling as we think they are. And we know this intuitively, but still we chase after them. But here's the thing, is that you can have all the money, and you can have the ripped six-pack, and you can have the perfect spouse, and you can have the awesome house, and you could even be doing all the traveling that you want to do, and you're still not going to be happy. And the reason that is because your inner game is not going to be dialed in. Your psychology. You need to have a certain emotional mastery. I really believe that in the 21st century, the next 100 years, that this is going to be the major shift in humanity, is that fewer people are going to be doing mundane jobs that require no creative input, no artistic endeavors, to a transition where everybody's going to be doing that and everyone's going to be striving for that. Because first of all, that's where you get your fulfillment from. Second of all, that's where the most value is generated for other people. Everyone struggles to do this. If you think that successful people and creators out there somehow just have this naturally handled, you're dead wrong. And in fact, that's one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, that keeps people from getting on track here. Because you will be challenging yourself.
So then, let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time, or any length of time you wanted to have. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure each, you would say, well, that was pretty great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Well, something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And you would dig that and come out of that and say, wow, that was a close shave, wasn't it? And then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now. You would dream the dream of living the life that you are actually living today. That would be within the infinite multiplicity of choices you would have, of playing that you weren't God.